Hey, and welcome to this introduction in Excel. In this video, we're going to look at the basics of Excel. Now, when we open up Excel, the first thing we see is all these rectangles. And these rectangles make up what's called a worksheet, and these rectangles are called cells. Now, there are two things we need to know when we are working in Excel, the two sort of first basic things to take into account. One is that most of the things that we want to do can be done through this up here, through these buttons here. So this bar, or what's also called a ribbon. The second thing is we want to make sure to see how many of these cells we have. Now, we have a certain amount of cells. Right now we see it's empty. We have a certain amount of cells in Excel, in a sheet. We'll look into that in a little bit. But we might want to see how many of them we have something in. If we're opening up a worksheet that somebody else has worked with, we want to see how many of them have been sort of used, how many of them are empty and how many of them are filled in. And also we want to see how many sheets we have, which we can see down here. So here we have one sheet, but we might have several. So if we press this plus button here, we see we get a little notification that says new sheet, and we can click that and we can generate a second sheet. So we need to know where we are. We can see these as then sort of layers of sheets on top of one another. We can zoom in, and we can do that down here. We can also use zoom in if we have a mouse by clicking Control and scrolling in on a PC. As you can tell, I'm working on a PC. Most of Excel is similar on a Mac. There might be some differences, specifically with the layout. And when it comes to short commands, in this course, we're not going to look too much at short commands. We're not going to try to memorize all of the various short commands for the operations or for the things we want to do in Excel, but there are a few handy ones that are very efficient, and for those I'll try to also include the Mac versions of those short commands. Now, we're in our cell here, or in our sheet, and we're looking at our cells, and so we want to ask a few things might come to mind when we're here. So one thing you might notice is generally in this that we see here that the language is in English. So Excel is part of the Microsoft Office package, and there the language here is English. But Microsoft Office has various different language versions of their software. So we can also get Excel in Swedish or in French or in Chinese and so on. So if you have Excel in a different language, you want to change it to English, how do you do that? We go here to File, and we go to Options. So let's do that again. We click File, and then furthest down is Options. And then we get a little pop-up of Excel options. And here we go to Language. And here we choose English as our preferred language. And if you are using, for example, a Swedish system or a Swedish keyboard and that kind of stuff, it might be good to have two so you can switch them around. You might not want to match Microsoft Windows. That might be in Swedish and so on. So you just pick English as your preferred. So you set it as preferred. You click OK. And you'll get a prompt to restart Excel for it to work, and you can do that. And then when you redo that, you'll see that all of this will be in English. Not only is there a benefit to having this be in English, but it's also a massive benefit we'll see later on when it comes to the various commands and code we write in Excel. So we don't have to write the commands and the code in Swedish. Now, when we're in Excel here, we might be interested in how big exactly is this sheet? We can see how many sheets we have down here. We only have 2. If we add more, then we'll see that this will fill out. It might hit, in the end we get a little bar or some arrows we can click and move between them. But we see here we only have 2 sheets. So now we might be interested in just, okay, so how big is one sheet? Well, we see here that the sheet contains cells. So how big a sheet is depends on how big a cell is. Or, well, rather, how many cells there are. So here we see we have rows and we have columns. And the rows are with numbers and the columns are with letters. And this is the standard default setting of Excel. And then, so the question of how many cells we have just becomes a question of, well, how many rows do we have and how many columns do we have? Well, we can easily check how many rows and columns we have by moving to the bottom of Excel, and we see, oh, it doesn't seem that far down, or to the right of Excel, it doesn't seem that far to the right. Let's see what happens when we do that. So let's go down, and we hear, oh, it's 22 rows. What happens when I click again? Oh, we see there's more than that. And if I scroll, I see there's even more. And if I, go down, I see there's even more and more. So it doesn't seem to end. But obviously, because we, exist in the real world of programming and software, there has to be some kind of end. It can't be infinitely large, or it potentially could have been a process that was infinitely large, but it would then easily crash. So how do we get to the bottom? Well, we'll use these short commands, because so far I've moved around in the various cells using my mouse, as we see here, but I can also move around the cells using my arrow keys. And it's quite useful to use your arrow keys in Excel when you're working. So if we use our arrow keys, we see that we move one cell at a time. But we don't have to move one cell at a time. We can make jumps. And how do we make jumps? Well, by holding in Control on the PC or Command on the Mac. And if I, for example, hit Control and press up, we'll see I'll jump up. And how far up did I go? I went up until I hit something. And since my sheet is completely empty, I went all the way to the top. So I hit this sort of border, if you will. If I start here, let's write something in this Excel. So if I write a number in here, and I press Control and press up, we see I hit that number. So I jump until I hit a cell with something in it. Otherwise, I just go all the way to the top. So Control, arrow up, there we go. Whilst if I'm here, Control, arrow up, I go all the way to the top. Okay, so we see that also works with the other arrows. Control, left. I've gone all the way to the left because there's empty cells. So here I can then press Control down and I should go all the way down. Let's see what happens. And we see that I do. And we see that Excel has 1,048,576 rows. And if I press Control arrow to the right, I get column XFD. And what is column XFD? That might not even make sense. Well, let's go here and see what happens. Well, we have the columns here, A, B, C. What happens when we go further to the right? X, Y, Z. And then because the letters end, we start again with AA, and then A, B, A, C. And then as soon as we get to here, AZ, we then switch to BA, and we see how the pattern emerges. And so that's what that means. And then, of course, when we're run out of combinations of the alphabet in two, or permutations rather, in two, using 2 letters, we add another letter. And we see that use 3 letters all the way to XFD. And what does that mean in terms of numbers? That means there's roughly 16,000 columns. So 1 million rows, roughly 16,000 columns, roughly. That's a lot of Excel cells in one sheet. So what then do we want to do with these cells, and what can we do? Are we going to learn to do in this introduction? Are we going to learn everything there is to know about Excel? No, we're not. And it is important to know that Excel is very big, Excel can be used for a lot of things, and it is not necessary to know everything about Excel in this course or in life even. So you should take the pressure off and feel like I just need to learn what I need to know, and that's what we're going to focus on here. And in that sense, there isn't going to be a book that says, well, everything in Excel, or the whole Excel book or something like that. That book would be too big. Rather, it's just looking at the methods and the aspects of Excel that are the most useful to us. So now that we've established what the cell is, what the sheet is, how we move around in the sheet, let's add some numbers. And we added a number before. How do we do that? It's very easy. We have a cell selected. We see that by the green border, and we just write something in here. So we just write a few numbers like this. And what did I do? I wrote a few numbers. I pressed enter, and what did we see happen? As soon as I pressed enter, I jumped down. So I went in this column D, one cell at a time. I could have also gone the other way. I press something like that. And what is that? Well, I'm doing the same thing, but instead of pressing enter, I'm pressing the tab button to jump in the row one cell to the right. It's usually less common and less needed, but it's good to know. And so what have I done here? I've entered numbers, and then Excel displays these numbers. And we can see what numbers I've entered. Well, you'd say, well, don't we see them right here? Yes, this is true. This is what Excel is displaying. And they're displaying what we've entered. But it's not always that what we enter and what Excel displays is the same thing. So we can see exactly what I've entered up here. And this is the formula bar. This big white rectangle here is called a formula bar. And this will be important later on. We'll see that here is my input, what I put into Excel. Here is my output, what I then get out of it, what the results are that are displayed. Now, in terms of numbers, I entered 1, 2, 3, and it displays 1, 2, 3. So there's no difference there, but we'll see that matters later on. And I have these numbers, and I put them into the cell I wanted. But in case that I put them into want them to be in a different cell, let's say, oh wait, I wanted these to be in this column here. Maybe I had some numbers up here and I didn't realize. For example, like that, classic mistake to make. I scroll up and say, oh yes, here was the column I had my numbers. I can take these and move them over here. And how do I do that? Well, I just copy and paste them, or cut and paste them. If I want to copy them, I can right click and copy, right click and paste. We see this is the first one, paste. They have little icons here. We see there are different ways to paste things. We'll get into some of those later, but here we just paste, and we get the numbers here. Alternatively, I can right-click cut and right-click paste. We saw then that there was only one option, not several, and to cut and paste them here. If I'm not happy with this, I can click undo. So I can click undo. I get back. This is still cut out, but the paste is undone. If I right click here, we see I only have one paste option when I cut instead of copied my numbers. That's how we can do that, but it's not the most efficient way of doing things. So again, here we want to use short commands. And what is the short command? Well, these are obviously known to most of you. It's Control-C for copy, Control-V for paste, and Control-X for copy, for cut, and Control-V for paste again. That's on the PC. On the Mac, it's Command-C for copy, Command-V for paste, and Command-X for cut. Now, we see now that by doing that, by having these short commands, it becomes much easier for me to move things around or copy them in different ways. And we see that I'm much more efficient now with my time. I can speedily jump through the process. But if I make a mistake, and that's often the case if we're working with Excel speedily, I can undo it by pressing the undo button. And we can undo several things. And the short command for that is Control Z, or on the Mac, Command Z. And if I undo, perhaps I can undo more than one mistake, so I can undo several things. But if I undo one thing too many, then I can press Control Y, or the redo button. And on the Mac, the Command Y, to remake those things or redo those actions. So we see I can go back with Control Z, redo with Control Y, or by clicking up here, but it's often easier just to do the short command. Now, not everything can be undone in Excel, so it's very handy, the undo. Generally, if you're working with something, especially if you're working with formats, so you're sort of changing things around and you need to be very precise, then you might do something wrong, or then the undo is the easy way to get around those kinds of things. But it's not everything that can be undone in Excel. For example, if we have a sheet like we have here, sheet 1 and sheet 2, so I jump at sheet 2, we see that this is not zoomed in like this one here is zoomed in 190. This one is not, so I'll zoom in here. We see that if we write something here, numbers, and then we say, well, I don't like this sheet, so I'm going to delete it. How do we delete the sheet? Well, we can right-click on it and go delete. You see here, so we delete. We'll get this little pop-up that says Microsoft Excel will permanently delete this sheet. Do you want to continue? Yes, I do. Delete. It's now been deleted. And then we realize, oh wait, I needed those numbers. Oh, let me just click the undo button. And then we see that, oh, it's grayed out. We cannot undo a deletion. And that's why we also got the pop-up window. In the same way, if we click Control Z, we just get an error bing there because it cannot be undone. So we shouldn't rely on being able to undo everything. Sometimes Excel will warn us with a pop-up that we saw there. They won't always warn us, so we shouldn't rely on that either. But it's very handy in a general sense for most cases. And that is all we need to know for this introduction. Thank you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.